Thanks so much for tuning into the Market Wrap. I'm Niraj Shah with Nickey Mirchandani, and it turned out to be an eventful day of trade, you have to admit. Much like though, as it's happening on a weekly basis, that after having a fairly large move, you're seeing a reverse move in the opposite direction, and be it long or short. I think today it happened on a daily basis wherein we cracked almost 1.8, 1.9% at a point of time, only to recover in the last second half of or the last 1 hour of trade and inch up a little bit. So that was a good part. I mean, this is the Nifty 50. And after this chart, before we move on to Nicky coming in and talking about individual name, maybe we'll try and get you the GIP or the intraday of the Nifty as well, which will kind of emphasize the point that I'm trying to make. But let's stick with this for a bit and just show you what moved and what didn't, and then we'll move on to the intraday. So IT stood out, right? And you would naturally expect that to happen simply because of a slightly defensive nature of the market. So names like TCS, HCL Technologies, and Tech Mahindra, led by the acquisition, did okay. Commodity names had a fairly decent outing today. IndusInd, so as you can see on the screen, JSW, Tata Steel, Hindalco, etc. And IndusInd Bank was a bit of an exception to the rule today because Bank Nifty otherwise was clobbered. But IndusInd and SBI stood out. What didn't do well, like I said, Bank Nifty took a bit of a hit. You had names right from HDFC Bank to Kotak, and in the NBFC space to Bajaj Finance really cracking under pressure. So there was some bit of pain there. Some bit of pharma stocks came off. I think there's a statistic which said that the pharma index is close to the November to 26 lows. And that looks fairly pointed, really, because all of the pharma names came off in the session today. So it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next few days. The only question is that if indeed the lockdowns reappear and there are a lot of meetings going on with various states in order to figure this out, could that impact the markets? Time will tell. Let's see. Well, Nicky Johnson, and this is, of course, the Nifty intraday that I was saying. The intraday, you will see the up move that we saw in the markets in the last 45 minutes of trade or 1 hour of trade after staying in a narrow band and with a negative bias for a better part of the day. So, Nicky, amongst the key names that you are highlighting with reasons, is it stock which corrected? Is it a stock which actually did well? What is it? Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Niraj. I'm going to speak about the defensive name here, Tech Mahindra, and then go on to steel because I have one key aspect to point out there. Tech Mahindra clearly was the stock that stood out for us today. The company is going to be acquiring a majority stake in Very Good Asset Holding, which is an island-based BPO service company. It's going to be acquiring in 70% equity shares, and that's would be for a consideration of around 21 million euros. So that's one bit which is clearly coming in. The acquisition seems to be positive for Tech Mahindra. The remaining 30%, however, will be acquired over the span of next 4 years. The deal is expected to close. This transaction is expected to close by March 19, 2021. So that's very few days away now. But Niraj, I'd like to highlight one a bit which was steel stocks, for instance, today did extremely well. But JSPL came over the weekend with the production and sales number, and the sales number rather showed in a dip, somewhat indicating that the domestic demand is not as strong as we perceive it to be at this point of time. Could be aberration of sorts for this month, that remains to be seen. But overall, the percent of exports, that's going high, essentially indicating that the domestic demand is not to an extent where the complete produce can be utilized for the domestic market, which in itself raises some amount of questions. But of course, Tata Steel and SAIL are yet to report the numbers, so it remains to be seen if the commodity cycle is as bullish as we're expecting it out to be. Or what are you picking up in the broader space?
Yeah, no, Nicky, just a question though. Do you reckon that is how it could shape up in the month of April as well? Or could this be because prices would have inched up and maybe people could have postponed the demand?
I mean, it's too early to say, Niraj. It's like an aberration of sorts, right? It's just a 1 month of trend which is playing out. The prices have taken a hit, and there has been a reluctance coming in when the buyer's point of view. But we still need to gauge if we see there is a percent of share which is incrementally going more into the exports rather than domestic market, then we're clear, right? That the domestic demand hasn't picked up to the pace as we think it would. And also, the realization would reflect that if more percent goes on to export, which to an extent are margin dilutive in nature, then probably we could see some moderation coming in Q4 results. But like I said, it's too early to point out at this point of time, and it remains to be seen whether this trend will continue. But what are you picking up in the broader space?
Yeah, actually, and viewers, just before we go to broader space, keep in mind that you want to look out for what happens to some of the PSUs. GAIL, the dividend meet, and BPCL today. Very interestingly, while the benchmark stock did not move as much, the futures recovered some bit of that divergence between themselves, and that's the key thing. So if you see this, this is the spot. Of course, the future did much better than the spot, and remember, in Friday the discount between the spot and the future had widened. But as we explained today in the trade setup as well, that if indeed the dividend is above 5% of the current market price, which seems to be the case or seems to be the possibility, then the futures price will converge with the spot. So keep this at the back of your mind. That is tomorrow, of course. GAIL will declare the dividend. So I think GAIL's numbers or dividend numbers will be interesting to know. Broader end of the spectrum, very quickly from my end, the market breadth was weak, and you would expect none less today. But a few stocks which really gave way. Look at that crack in APA Apollo Tubes, 9% lower. Remember, this had a one-way street from about 1,000 rupees all the way to nearly 1320 or 1350 that it went up to before starting to correct now, down about 9% today. And Apollo Tricode would have also corrected a little bit. Remember, the ratio is swap ratio is 1:1. There was weakness in Aegis Logistics, down 5% at 288. There was weakness in HAL, Bagram Puccini, etc. So all of these came off. What did well? Sterling Wilson Solar, Opera Realty, ending at 596, up about 7%. And this is a really big draw, simply because this was turning out to be the best top stock idea for a clutch of brokerages, Opera Realty. So that did very well. Sale had a 5% uptick. Also, Delta Corp with Nazara doing what it's doing in terms of appetite in the IPO, are likely to do rather. Delta Corp also gaining about 4%. Nikki, what names stood out and why?
Yeah, I mean, Megmani Organics, right? There is one, or Lakshmi Organics IPO, which is open, and the specialty chemical makers have been doing well. This space is pretty hot at this point of time. You're seeing the stock rallying for more than third consecutive session. Is rallied more than 45, percent in the last three odd session. There is a buzz of around demerger, but nothing concrete. RSI is at 88, indicating that the stock may be overbought, and of course, the stock has been trading on the higher volumes, right? 19.7 times to 30-day average volumes in itself speaks about volume in which the stock is being purchased at this point of time. Apart from that, Poly Medicure, that's one counter that did extremely well in trade today. The company plans to build in two new plants by early 2023. It's going to be investing in $60 million to $75 million over the next 2-3 years. In the new infra, and it's going to be driving in maximum amount of revenue coming in from international markets, which in itself is 60% at this point of time. So it remains to be seen how much the quantum goes up higher from this kind of investment. But I'm going to quickly toss it back to you, Niraj, and ask you about what do you think about Lakshmi Organics IPO? I was reading into the valuation, 35 times, 37 times PE, the copy that you've written, the story that you've written, spoke about peer group comparison. Would you like to speak a little bit about how attractive this business is at this point?
Well, it's looking fairly attractive, Nikki, simply because of the business that it has, and with the new capacities coming on stream, I think it could do rather well on the revenue front. Remember, at a fairly tepid FY20 over FY19 because of floods in one of the plants, which had impacted the revenue growth for them. So FY21 H1, the revenue growth has been pretty solid, and they expect this to continue in FY22-23. And with the new plant coming on stream, maybe adding a different dimension to the top line. So looks good. Pedigree promoters, a lot of experience, and frankly, some of the other IPOs are even more expensive. So you don't quite know where to draw the line. It'll be interesting to see. The two specialty chemical IPOs on thus far. It'll be interesting to see. But and Nazara too, another gaming company. So lots of things to look forward to. What about you, Nikki? Anything that stands out? And of course, what about global markets?
Yeah, I mean, if you could just dwell on a little about Lakshmi Organic, I was just looking into the bottom line performance. In first half, it was a 45 crore number. If you analyze it, almost 90 crore. And PAT that it registered was to an extent of 70 crores. So clearly, we are looking at, if at all, if we could analyze that number in the first place, clearly a good set of numbers coming in even on the bottom line performance of the company. But let's go back to a global check at this point of time. European markets are trading in positive, and European markets, the US stock futures too, are indicating a positive start coming in for Wall Street. There's a positive note following the whole strong Chinese growth and ahead of key Federal Reserve meeting. So it remains to be seen how does that stack up, what kind of stimulus, what kind of undertone plays out. But that's all that we have for you at this point of time. Thank you so much for tuning in.